We have had more than 40 gigawatts of new projects installed with nearly 100 megawatt hours of capacity. So that's quite impressive because it basically means that volumes quadrupled from 22 to 23.
And there are key regions to serve local markets to reduce transportation costs. Now there are huge opportunities in local manufacturing hubs like maybe China, the States, South Korea, Germany as well, or Southeast Asia.
Last year marked a turning point with record additions in the energy storage industry, and the outlook to 2030 is even more impressive. Experts at BloombergNEF forecast an annual growth rate of 27%, with annual additions expected to reach 110 gigawatts or 372 gigawatt hours by 2030. That equals more than 2.5 times the 2023 installations. This momentum is fueled by targeted subsidies and policy reforms that favor energy storage projects. New markets are opening up around the world that are increasingly relying on energy storage solutions to meet their capacity requirements. The Asia-Pacific region in particular, led by China, is seeing strong growth, accounting for almost half of global access. But what is actually happening deep in the West, in South America, but also in Latin America? We'll find out in this episode. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. For this episode, I'll actually have the pleasure of talking to two experts at the same time. On the one hand, Patricia Tatto, Vice President for America at ATA Renewables, an independent renewable energy group with more than 200 gigawatts of expertise in projects worldwide. And on the other hand, I'm happy to welcome back in this podcast Managing Director of NewCharge Energy, Markus Vlasits. NewCharge Energy develops solutions for power generation and storage all throughout Brazil. And with that, let's jump right into the episode. Welcome, Patricia. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much for the invite. I'm so excited. Thank you.
And welcome, Markus. Great to have you back again.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being back again. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, we'll have a specific look into certain markets in Mexico and in Brazil and South America. But before we do that, let's have the global outlook, the global overview from both of you. Maybe starting with you, Markus. What's your overview of the global energy storage market currently? What are the most important trends or innovations we should be aware of?
I think it's worth noting that on a global level, the energy storage market is really experiencing very impressive growth rates. 2023 has been an extremely strong year. We have, at least according to numbers published by Bloomberg and IEA and a couple of other agencies, we have had more than 40 gigawatts of new projects installed with nearly 100 megawatt hours of capacity. So that's quite impressive because it basically means that volumes quadrupled from 22 to 23. If we look at it from a geographic kind of breakdown, then clearly China as the leading market is actually consolidating its stake as a leading market. And in China, obviously, energy transition is an important policy goal. And so we have seen over the last years very strong growth of both solar and wind and also many other sources of energy, not only renewable, also fossil, but 23 also was a record year of new solar installations. And so in order to be able to integrate all that intermittent renewable energy into the grid, China needs to invest heavily into energy storage. And so what we see very often in China are large-scale energy storage applications, either coupled with wind and solar farms or on a standalone basis, which basically serve the grid.
Patricia, what would you add from your perspective when we talk about trends or innovations?
Well, I think these trends and innovations are the ones that are driving the evolution of energy storage. Literally, there is a greater improvement through the years in terms of costs and technology. We will see more inputs about different types of battery technology through the years. So I think I'm with Markus that this is just the beginning.
Just to name drop a few, Patricia, which battery technologies are in the pipeline to reshape the market?
The battery technologies that are now more bankable are lithium technologies, and these are the ones that are basically that we have seen in the recent years. There are a lot of other storage technologies, but if you want to talk about it, I can talk about that later.
All right. So let's focus on the factors driving growth for the energy storage systems market, so the ESS market. Which factors do you think are the most significant drivers of this really quadrupling of the market?
Maybe before we talk about the factors, let me just quickly talk about some other markets, because I just mentioned China, but obviously China, as important as it is not the only relevant market. So we have seen also very significant growth in the United States, and in the US we have a handful of states that are really leading this growth. Basically California, Texas, and then comes the rest. And in these two states, we really see a lot of coupling of basically solar and wind again with BESS, but we also see a couple of really large scale standalone systems. For example, right now the largest BESS in the Western Hemisphere is located in Moss Landing, which is the site of an old thermoelectric power plant. Then we have many other exciting markets. So we have had very strong growth in Europe as well. Germany, Italy, I think are the lead markets, but there is a lot of exciting stuff coming out of other locations. Poland, for example, is just starting and waking up. We are seeing very strong growth in Australia as well. And we'll be talking more about Latin America in a minute, but Chile definitely is right now one of the leading markets in South America for energy storage.
Just to complement what Marcos says, it's like this market varies by the market is capacity varies by region. There is significant growth in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, but Latin America is also coming behind. There are some advancements in battery technologies, like you say. It could be in the chemistries, like lithium-ion solid-state batteries that are having the energy density, also longer cycle life, faster charging capabilities, and lower cost per kilowatt hour. Those are guaranteeing battery performance and safety. And also we need to take in consideration the scale of the deployment in those markets, because there is a huge need of infrastructure on those markets. So we will need to consider this as well in our, in those markets. How is advancing depending in the market? Like some of the countries that Marco mentioned have very good regulatory frameworks, or also have incentives to deploy, and also have better transmission considerations. So like Latin America is lacking for some of these things. So we will have to review the challenges that are happening in those countries and the differentiation of another countries that are more developed.
But if I take it, those countries that have favorable regulatory frameworks or incentives are probably the ones seeing the biggest growth.
Yeah, and clearly energy storage does not happen in a vacuum. That's for sure. And I think what we see a lot, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, but also in places like Australia, is the push to decarbonize the electricity grid. And that push to decarbonize basically means that variable renewable or intermittent renewable sources like solar especially, but also wind, will have growing participations in the overall energy mix. And in order to handle that intermittent energy generation, we need to have a couple of technologies in place. You need to have more resilient and stronger transmission networks. And, everyone around the world is investing in upgrading transmission networks. And obviously, with the decrease of prices of energy storage systems, especially battery energy storage system, BESS, basically we see that large-scale applications, ancillary services, battery coupled to wind, solar are becoming economically viable. But really, if you look around the policy frameworks you have in the US, you have the IRA, which is an extremely important policy pushing the adoptions not only of renewables but also of batteries. We have targets and mandates in specific states. If you look into Australia, we have something similar there. China is quite actually heavy-handed with determining certain participation of energy storage. But the good news is that the technology has reduced so much in its cost that you see an increasing amount of applications and business models in which you do not rely on any subsidies or any heavy-handed government intervention. The thing simply becomes economically viable.
Today's episode is presented by Jinko ESS, a strategic arm of Jinko Solar focusing on cutting-edge storage solutions. Specializing in LFP battery storage, Jinko ESS offers Santerra, a utility-scale system with 5 MWh capacity, and Sun Giga, tailored for industrial and commercial applications, offering up to 344 kWh capacity. Click on the link in the show notes to find out more about Jinko ESS. Now, we just talked about the implementation of ESS so far. What's the state when it comes to manufacturing? So how is the market currently structured? How are the locations in Europe or South, Central, North America developing? Patricia?
Well, as this market continues to grow, also manufacturers are expanding their production capacities. So they are also into this, driving into this market energy demand. The expansion could be including the manufacturing facilities that also there is big manufacturing facilities in China, but also there are fabrics that are looking into around the world. They are currently retrofitting the existing facilities and investing in some advanced technologies to increase efficiency and scale production. It's become more diversified, as I said, because the lithium production also you can find in different countries, and there are key regions to serve local markets to reduce transportation costs. We have seen this through COVID, so I think now there are huge opportunities in local manufacturing in hubs like maybe China, the States, South Korea, Germany as well, or Southeast Asia. And also they are optimizing their supply chains. We can see now phenomena like solar panel producers are also making batteries, or other sort of producers in the value chain are adapting their supply chains to also provide these materials like raw materials or components, and to be more vertically integrated. Like we've seen more like companies that are vertically integrated to produce these sort of technologies. And also they are reducing costs because we are working with the scale, the leverage of the technologies of large scale projects. Also, this improving the quality and the safety of the components as well, because more and more is the huge need of certify the equipment and to have this adapted to each market, like to comply with the grid codes, etc. So because the market is growing so fast, we also need to adapt that technology to each regulatory and grid code framework. So they need to comply with large certifications also in these markets.
Anything you would like to add to what Patricia already mentioned, Markus?
Yeah, in the spirit of open discussion, and with all due respect, I'm not sure whether I agree, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if you just look into at what happened in 23, the aggregate battery production, and now we're talking about lithium ion, has been around 2,200, 300 gigawatt hours, something like that, the vast majority of which obviously has been dedicated to electric mobility and electronic devices. So I think the first thing that we need to keep in mind when we talk about energy storage is that right now, quite frankly, the demand of stationary energy storage systems is a rounding error in a much larger global value chain. Point number one. Point number two, I think if you look into the lithium, and by the way, I agree with Patricia's take that LFP is becoming the dominant chemistry, especially for stationary applications, but also increasingly for electric mobility, not for mobile devices, obviously. And so if you look into the value chain of LFP, of lithium iron phosphate, what do you see? You have a handful of states which are really dominating the raw material, which is Chile, Australia, and then comes the rest. But if you look everything that is then further down the stream, be it cathode and anode materials production, cell manufacturing, module manufacturing, integration of the modules into functioning BESS, I think we just have to acknowledge that right now China has a dominant position, right? And I don't have the exact market numbers at the top of my head, but I would wager that China probably right now for battery module production has a market share north of 90%. So yes, we have large battery factories both in Europe and the United States. And, we can discuss which of those two regions is further ahead in catching up. But right now, really, the battery, at least the lithium-ion battery value chain, is dominated by China. I think we just have to be very realistic about that. And if you look into other technologies, again, I would agree with Patricia. We have a couple of promising stuff, sodium ion, for example, but that might be more promising for, let's say, low-cost electric mobility solutions like scooters and those kind of things. We have flow batteries whose value chain is just minuscule in comparison to lithium ion. So yes, we have some diversification, but the majority of the manufactured goods and the components that we use today basically comes out of China.
Before we go on, Patricia, anything you would agree or disagree with when talking with what you heard from Markus?
No, I totally agree. And yes, it's China who is leading the market, but we have seen also that there is a huge opportunity for several countries to develop that sort of market, no? Because unlike in Mexico, we own the raw material, and some of the countries that own the raw material could be perfectly producers of battery manufacturers. And considering that if we have to ship the logistics, that the battery start losing capacity, from China on all the way to Chile, for example. So I think it's very, very interesting to consider it in countries that they will have like huge development of batteries, no?
No, I think the regionalization of the BESS value chain is an important goal. There's no doubt about that. It does not make sense to ship everything out of one country, especially because, batteries, when it comes to shipping lithium-ion batteries, there are a couple of safety restrictions that apply different to, say, sodium-ion. Having said that, we know that we only will be able to maintain and even accelerate the growth of the global energy storage market to the extent that we can further decrease prices. And so if we talk about regionalization of value chains, it means that we have to be at least as competitive or even more competitive than the companies and the players that are producing nowadays. And that's, quite frankly, I think that's just a challenge, And we have seen in solar how, despite best efforts, European and US players have not been able to compete with Asian players. Just a fact, unfortunately, but it's just a fact. And we have to see how this will play out in the global BESS supply chain. But I think there is place for local engineering, there's place for local software development, I think there is place for local system integration. So even if, let's say, cell manufacturing continues to be quite scale sensitive and centralized, which I think it will be, then there is definitely room for worthwhile localization efforts.
Speaking about regionalization, let's dive into the region specifics. Let's start with you, Patricia. So what market specifics in Mexico should we talk about? How has the energy storage market developed recently, and which factors were behind this development?
So in Mexico, it's still not a policy. So we have a market that is developed by a regulatory framework that was set in 2013 with an energy reform. But it has been stopped the way that we were going to implement the storage in the country. So there is currently no regulatory framework to discuss. We want to have business models like the business models that allow to pay for a battery, but still, we want this year we're going to discuss a new regulatory framework that the Commission of Regulatory of Energy will launch, but apparently it will be just the beginning of something of how to regulate batteries in the country, using also only the battery as a peak shaving. But because we don't have a market yet, there is still a lot of uncertainty on how you can use the battery here. There are some large-scale projects. I think there are 5 large-scale projects that have large-scale batteries in the country. but they only use is for peak shaving. They're not using for any other model in the market because there is not a current business model that can pay in the long term that you can see how you're going to make the return of the investment in your battery. Yes, it's a huge need because there is a lack of infrastructure. There are no transmission lines enough to serve all the need of renewable energy that needs the market. But we are waiting for this new regulation, and also we will have a new government next year. So that will allow us to have better overview of how the market is going to pan out. At the moment, autoabasto, which means mini grids, are the most common ones that they don't need interconnection permits. The ones that we are analyzing, but it's not the scale is for commercial industrial, not for large scale, which needs your interconnection permit, and we have now problems with that.
All right, so it's a market in the beginnings. You're still waiting for regulatory frameworks to really shape the field. There's some projects specifically in the mini-grid area, but the large-scale area still needs to be developed.
There is a program in Mexico that is called the Programa de Desarrollo del Sistema Eléctrico Nacional, that it predicts that between 2022 and 2036, we can be installing 4 gigawatts of storage systems in Mexico. And this is a huge number also, with taking in consideration that we don't still have regulation. But we are waiting to see that, to know what are going to be the real services that we can provide. So we need to include the rules in the electric market and to establish this regulatory, and also to promote development and research and development in the market, because we see that there is a lot of capacity to provide technical opportunities for people to work in this area. Yes, Mexico could be a service hub for other countries to provide also capabilities, like human capabilities, like work, and for the states and in the different value chain.
So that's interesting, though. Although the market is sort of still in its infancy, there could be an opportunity for Mexico to not only grow their own market, but to actually play a role in neighboring markets. So that's quite interesting. I guess it's a very different picture when we look into Chile or Brazil. Is that right, Markus?
Partially, Zakis. I think what is true in all countries around the world, that we all wish regulations and regulators were way faster and more responsive. And I think it's a shared grief that regulation is always lagging, and also admittedly, energy storage is something of an unusual creature for electricity sector regulators to get their arms around. But if we look into South America right now, it's clear that Chile is the most relevant market in terms of track record, i.e. implemented projects, but also in terms of pipeline. And this is curious if you think that Chile is a relatively small market, right? I mean, it's like a very thin, narrow country down there in the extreme south of the South American continent. But right now we have more than 1 gigawatt hour of projects implemented. The vast majority of those projects are coupled with solar, also some wind stuff, but mostly with solar. And we have now the first large-scale standalone projects in the making. And the reason for this, I think, is relatively understandable if you look at this Chilean market. Chile has had a very strong growth of solar. All of solar power generation, or virtually all of the solar power generation, obviously is located in the north of the country, in the Antofagasta district, so the Atacama Desert. And most of the consumption is in central Chile, around Santiago. And that means that the country has a very significant problem with curtailment. So there are many hours of the day when there is excess solar energy. Consequently, Chile also has extremely high deltas between peak and off-peak prices. That would basically mean that solar power plants would be selling their energy at extremely low rates, or even would be injecting their energy at moments when the price is negative. And this means that it makes sense to basically couple large-scale storage with solar. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So we have IS solar, Solar Andes 2SB, which has nearly 600 megawatt hours, La Coya with 680 megawatt hours, and so on and so forth. So really large projects in the making. Brazil right now is dormant. So we have a very significant market potential. We believe that Brazil, during the next 6 to 7 years, could be installing something around 25 gigawatt hours of energy storage. But right now, the installed base is relatively small. We right now have something around 400 megawatt hours of installed battery projects. And if we look into the main growth opportunities in Brazil, we have off-grid, because Brazil has more than actually 200 municipalities in northern Brazil, towns which are not interconnected, and more or less half of those towns never will be connected because they're just so remote. So in order to supplant fossil electricity generation in those places, you need solar or some other renewable sources and batteries. So that in itself should give us something of 1 gigawatt hour of growth potential just for off-grid. And then we are having similar problems like in Chile, meaning that there is a lot and there's increasing curtailment, especially for solar. And that means that coupling batteries with solar, both for optimizing the selling of solar energy, but also in order to provide grid services, is a hot topic. So Brazil has, for example, an auction scheme for contracting reserve capacity, a bit similar to what the UK does. So far, this market down here in Brazil has only been open to fossil fuel power plants. And right now there's quite an important discussion going on about opening this market, this auction scheme for energy storage. And, we're talking about big numbers. I mean, the last auction there was about 4 gigawatts, and we're expecting something around 4 to 5 gigawatts per annum for this reserve capacity scheme. So interesting things ahead.
In regards to time, unfortunately, we'll have to come to the last two questions already, I'm afraid, Markus.
I think there's just one interesting thing to add about Brazil, that Brazil will be long in energy, in electric energy, of the couple of years. We have, a domestic load of around 110, 115 gigawatts, and we'll have an installed capacity far superior of 250 gigawatts. And that means we'll have actually too much electricity. Most of that excess electricity is going to come from solar and to some extent from wind. So again, this actually creates a perfect condition for using large-scale energy storage, because you have to do something with the surplus, and you can store it in order to dispatch it during the evening peak hours. So I think this is becoming quite an emerging pattern.
All right. Now, that was quite a specific look into the Mexican market, the Chilean market, and Brazil. Coming back to the global perspectives, I think you mentioned already some battery technologies early on when we started the podcast, but what sort of new technologies or innovations in the energy or in energy storage do you find particularly promising for the future?
As Patricia already said, right now we have a global supply chain that is mostly around lithium. Now, having said that, there is a huge amount of alternative storage technologies available. I mean, you can look into mechanical storage, thermal storage, but even if you look into the kind of electrochemical portfolio, you have sodium ion, you have flow batteries, you have air zinc batteries, etc. And a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, people were actually questioning the end of lithium, because the prices of lithium batteries had started to rise quite significantly due to a very strong demand for electric mobility. So people were really starting to look into alternative chemistries. I think now that we see that lithium prices have come down very significantly, that upstream exploration projects are coming online, it might be that we will end up in a world where also the majority of stationary applications will be lithium, especially lithium iron phosphate, which is just more stable, it's less expensive, it has a longer lifetime than the other lithium chemistries, most of the lithium chemistries. But I think there's always room for innovation. I think that, for example, sodium ion is really exciting, because you can use the existing manufacturing setup, and with little conversion, a cell factory which today produces lithium ion cells will be producing tomorrow sodium ion cells. I think there is some space also for flow batteries, to the extent that those people can finally get up to scale, because all of those technologies are very small scale. And then we will see how things work out. But, if I were to make a a guess, and of course I might be totally wrong, I think it's more likely than not that we will have, for stationary energy storage, 70-80% lithium, or maybe even more over the next 4 or 5 years, and then we'll have a couple of niche applications that will be using other chemistries.
Now, that was in terms of the technologies that might be along the way. And if we look to the future, Patricia, how do you envision the role of energy storage in the global energy transition? Like, what key aspects should be addressed to accelerate the integration of storage technologies?
I think there is a huge need to develop with new business models and disrupting the business models. We have seen more and more challenges in transmission and distribution lines, so that will allow the grid to be more flexible and reliable and have energy security, which all the countries are needing just right now. And also the tendency of storage in green hydrogen as well, so we can also vision that green hydrogen can provide also a storage application going forwards. And the need of decarbonization in the current industries is more and more needed, no? The nearshoring opportunities that are not only for Mexico, they are around the globe to the local, to play local and to develop new ways of business models as well within the markets. There is a disruption in the renewable energy way of the renewable energy business models, so we will need to improve or use that to growth in the energy storage market.
Wow, we covered quite a lot of ground in this episode. Thanks a lot. We had the global outlook, we had a deep dive into Mexico and one into Chile and Brazil. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Lovely to speak to you and to Markus.
And thanks a lot, Markus, for being back again.
Thanks for having me, and looking forward to future episodes. Thank you.
Experience the latest innovations in energy storage at the Smarter E-events all around the world. Whether in Munich, Sao Paulo or Mexico City, come and see us. You can find all the dates online at thesmartere.com.